All right. So let's go ahead and settle into a comfortable position. Resting in that space just in front of the sitting bones. Your back is straight and comfortable, folding from the hips to allow your weight to settle into the right position rather than trying to round forward to get to the right spot. Instead, allow your back to be straight and comfortable, not overarched. A lot of people that have constant tension here have this position. So you want to soften this part of your back until it's more or less flat looking from the outside. Crown of the head is released upward. Base of the neck is soft. Most people live in this position. And so even when they pull their head back as hard as they can, it may only come to here. This makes it especially difficult to begin to soften the neck. But we want to not force it to go back because that just creates more problems that we have to overcome. Instead, just be in as upright a position as you can. And even if your head is like this, let it release more in this direction. And then after some months or years of practice, it will slowly migrate on its own back into the proper position. But as with everything, we don't use force, or that just compounds the problems. Becomes very interesting, but that is not the kind of compound interest we are looking for. Exhaling and allowing your whole body to melt. Inhaling and allowing that stillness to deepen. And don't beat yourself up, for those of you who have that tendency. If you notice that it's being difficult for you to relax even a little bit, just recognize that even setting your intention in the direction of letting go is progress, because probably before that moment, your intention was to grip and stress and freak out. So even that intent adjustment is progress. Just being here is progress. Just appreciating my cool new shirt, huge progress, transformative. But for most of us, this seated softening allows maybe a 5% shift, something noticeable. And that is huge progress, because that becomes part of the new conditioning. And because we're doing this every day, this pattern is soaking its way into our system. I'm sure you've already noticed. Every day, like water cutting the rock, we just come back to it, taking all of this time to release. Hey, Del, welcome. Wait until you feel as though you've softened and settled as best as you're going to. And if you feel like this seated practice is just by itself, just sitting there is being incredibly helpful for you, then just stay there. Let us move on with the form, and you just soak in that ambient softening, because there will be some days when this is the perfect practice for you. You're just sitting, you're releasing, and this stillness and softness is deepening. And often there will be the experience that people will report that they're sitting there, their awareness becomes absorbed in this process, and then, 5 seconds later, they look around and it's actually 2 hours later, 3 hours later. That's a pretty common report that people will give. And so you want to allow that opportunity to happen. And again, if you force it, if you try to make that happen, then you just obstruct it and it will never happen. So you have to learn how to get out of the way and let go. That's why at this stage, learning to listen and get out of the way is, in some ways, the primary practice. But I always want to encourage people to do their own practice, because the moment that these things happen, you want to notice it. Similarly, as we move through this form, you might find that one of them just feels extra wonderful, like your body is releasing deeply for some reason, or maybe that one spot in your body really needs it that day. And so your job is to listen to that and just stay there. Keep giving it the treatment that it's asking for until it can change, because those are those important moments that the big shifts occur. And they don't want to occur every day, but when they do come once in a while, you have to be awake and looking for them, and then listen. Those are those moments that no teacher can lead you to. I can just point and say, hey, pay attention for this moment. And Del, thank you for always reminding people to hit the like button. It's against my nature to go like, comment, and subscribe. Ha! I don't think I could get myself to do it. But it is nice when people help that way, because it does aid the algorithm and pushes my work to people. Remember to let your thumb emphasize that space just at the base of the skull. And as I'm trying to get in the habit of saying every time, I know that there are likely people right now hovering in the background that I cannot see and that I do not know. And maybe this is your first time. When we looked at the statistics, there are hundreds of people clicking on this video for 10 minutes or so randomly. And then they click away because they probably don't know what's happening. So I just want to say that if that is you, then if you look in the comment section, there is a link to a video that is an introduction to this form, where you can learn what this is all about. And it should be easier than jumping in the deep end of a 100-day teaching sequence. Make sure your hands are nice and warm. make sure that your intent is also warm, soft. So for the next couple of weeks, we are going over the 12 major channels that are on the arms and legs, just one at a time. Yesterday, we worked on one. Today, we will also add a new one. Very exciting. And this point here is one of the final points on this channel, just alongside the nose here. And guess which channel I'm currently touching to that? So this is the finger we're focusing on. Just like yesterday, use the tool, the mnemonic tool, to think of something that reminds you of this. Maybe it's just pointing at something. You. This is very rude in China. You. Or me. Think of however you would like it to be. Whatever this finger means. The channel that we're working on is the large intestine channel. Large intestine channel, one end is here, one end is up here. Pretty interesting, huh? And we're not working on learning the points on the head or the face or the neck, but it is interesting that this channel comes all the way up alongside the nose. And so today, as a way to work on it and to remind you, I'll emphasize using this index finger, the second finger. That feels weird. Nice job, Chris. And so again, find a way to remember that the index finger is related to the large intestine. It can be as gross as you want because that's what you'll remember. If you know other interesting relationships to the large intestine or the colon, you can include that in relationship to this finger. Like the worst Harry Potter spell ever. But whatever it is that you remember, just link it to this finger and you'll never forget. In the same way that maybe you'll remember what this one was. Remember to release all around your jaw, and that as the jaw releases, it releases open this way and also open this way forward. So it's not just that it hinges. Deli, you're asking about the imagery that I use for the large intestine and the index finger. And I hesitate to give it just because it's gross, because of how I think of the large intestine. But you can use anything that you want. God. I guess that is one way to remember it, Chris. Mine, like I said, when I was in school, the Harry Potter thing was still going strong, and the imagery that I used was a whole collection of various characters from shows that I've watched over the years that mean something to me, that relate to each of the organs and the channels. And I used my body as a memory palace tool. So for me, it was a very intricate thing. But this point I used on the end of the finger as, like I mentioned, a very gross Harry Potter wand. But the memory remains. And so that's the whole goal. So make it as outlandish as you like for all of these memory tools. But yeah, feel free to share it if you'd like in the comments, but be forewarned for people who read the comments. But Make sure you don't skip that settling moment. In some ways, it's the most important part of the practice. Yeah, and Del, it's worth looking up for everybody. If you don't know what a mind mapping system is, it's a term coined by a famous author named Tony Buzan. It's an older method, but he's the one that put it into a book, so he gets the credit. And it's just a way of organizing your thoughts and making connections between them on paper with colors and shapes. And since he put out the book in the 70s or the 80s, there's a lot of varieties that are out there now. It's worth just YouTubing it. There's lots of teachers who share it. I think it's a much more natural way, much more human way, especially if you're non-neurotypical, to make connections and to learn about anything at all, languages, history, anything, even Chinese medicine. And it's too big of a subject to cover, but it is worth looking up. And the memory palace is a separate memory technique you can include in that. But that's more of the one that I tend to use for long-term memory stuff. This kind of thing that we're doing is just a simple association method. We're associating a finger with an idea and the points on the bodies with ideas, because the channels are pretty easy to learn. And so you usually don't require some big memory palace method or something more sophisticated. But it is worth learning about. I'm a huge fan of the memory methods. Releasing all the way over and around. Again, breast tissue if you have it, or if you have more of it than I do at least. And releasing all the way out toward the shoulder from the center, all of this stuff that comes across. Warming and softening. Easing open all around the shoulder. Softer is better. So within Chinese medicine, the lung and the large intestine are a yin and yang pair. And you don't really need to know that for this practice. But part of what that means in this case is that the channels are right next to each other. And so one reason one is on one finger and on the next finger is because the channels are located very close to each other on the arm. And so if the lung channel was running down just on this side of that tan line, again, this is just a way to remember it. If you flip your arm over toward usually the more tan side, the large intestine channel runs more on that side, just in that line, pretty close to the lung channel. From the index finger and up to this point in the shoulder and here. And so as we soften this part of the shoulder, that knobbly part up there and just toward the front of it, feel the warmth collect and release in that area. So before we were working with the lung channel, which is more on the soft forward space and under. This is more like over the top and down. Easing that open. And then this very next point that we often spend time on here, right at the end of the elbow crease, in the center of that muscle here that stands up. softening that point open. Large intestine 11, a very useful point. Releasing all of this that accumulates in that point. And then a bit further down, large intestine 9 and 10 are right in this area. So you can make the movements a bit larger, but you still want to emphasize this warming release of this tissue that grips up here, just beneath the skin. Easing it open toward the fingers, especially the index finger. And then back to this point here that we talked about yesterday. This is on the lung channel. So I could use my thumb to stimulate that if I wanted to, connecting the channel across from itself. But that's just something for fun. Softening the center of the wrist, easing it open toward the fingers. I know that some of you have difficulty focusing and requested that I keep giving reminders to bring you back, because if I don't talk, then it's easy for you to drift away. So I'll just occasionally put out reminders to soften your shoulders, relax your breath, make sure you remain in comfortable upright posture. If you're working and should be taking a break, perhaps put away your computer, your other computer. Soft and easy. If I'm under this side of the arm, at the base of the thumb, I'm tending to release the lung channel. If I come over on the outside, this part here, I'm tending to release the large intestine channel. And that's why we move up to this wonderful large intestine point, large intestine 4, right here in the hand. Gentle stimulation. Soft and easy. Emphasize releasing the index finger. You can gently twist the finger, very gently. This isn't a stretch, you're just softening that layer of fascia, soft tissue that reaches out there. Again, no muscles in the fingers, and so we need to gently help them circulate. Keeping your shoulders released. Soften your jaw. Warm and easy. Friendly, not aggressive. It's so easy to become aggressive with our bodies. Find a way to be different. You can dip your hands into that hole near the shoulder at the top, and then very gently work your way down to the front of the shoulder. And it's a little bit difficult to see with the black shirt on. Easy and gentle, all the way around the arm. Remember the base of the elbow if you'd like. Underneath. Warming and releasing all of that tissue. And then coming down to crook of the elbow here. Further down the arm. Gently releasing. All the way down. Oh, hey, Anna. Welcome. Anna, today we're working on the large intestine channel. So from large intestine 11, 10, 9, softening down the arm. easing open the wrist. Not a lot of pressure, just enough to stimulate that tissue beneath the skin to release. Your whole wrist is easy and soft. Your hands are relaxed. Softening the base of the thumb. On this side, it's the lung channel. This is lung 9, this is lung 10. Easing it, warming it. And for today, we can emphasize just on the outside of the thumb. Emphasizing still this release of the joint. But this shows how close those two channels are, especially here on the wrist and the hand. This is large intestine 5, that little notch that appears if you lift your thumb. Large intestine 4. He gu. The he is like to unite, to join. A gu is like a valley. It's a symbol of the feminine. Joining valleys. Soft and open. Easy. Releasing the fingers, emphasizing that index finger, which is, of course, the end of the large intestine channel. Releasing all the way through. Allowing that sense of warmth to reach so that the fingertip starts to turn bright red, or whatever color your finger turns. Some color is good. Closing and settling. Take the time to feel everything soften downward. Waiting for that sense of a shift, even if it's small. That things become grounded and settled. Your mind a fraction more quiet, your emotions a bit more calm. Eventually, you'll experience a physical shift as your qi collects in the dantian, and it's obvious. But until then, we look for small symptoms and changes. The feeling of our qi sinking. My fingers are turning green. I guess it depends. Where are you putting your fingers? Oh, the tea is gone now. We are probably not going to practice the sounds in this class. The sounds require, at least the way that I've learned to do the sounds over the years, there's a number of varieties. The one that I think is more effective is it requires a higher level of ability to release. And so I probably won't teach that online unless I feel clear that there are people that can soften that much. And so probably not. And the sounds themselves are associated with some of the channels, but they're not specifically for the channels. Releasing the solar plexus. Easy. A bit lower. Letting your gentle awareness soak in, quieting. Things become very still inside. As you release the rib side, remember to lead that intent as it soaks in to the tissues with a sense of friendliness, kindness, gentleness, generosity of spirit. This is the antidote to the anger, the frustration, the rage that soaks into the tissues, becomes poison. Cultivate the antidote. Ideally, you cultivate it through becoming very still, because in deep stillness lies all of these qualities of kindness, friendliness, connection, compassion, love. But in the meantime, it is certainly a worthwhile goal to artificially cultivate and develop this sense of warmth inside. softening the belly. Remember that when we're talking about changing the tissues, that which transforms them is deep softness, which allows for them to open, to become spacious, releasing the spaces between, allowing movement to happen. This is what allows qi flow to find its way through. But you also can't do it by just changing your physical tissues. You need to change your mind. Allow your awareness to settle. That is just as important. Sometimes that's more difficult for people, so we start with simply softening the body. And this helps the mind to become still, because there really isn't a difference between them. This is all one continuum of healing. So any practices that we do that cultivate tension of the mind, of the breath, of the body, these slow that exchange and that transformation. So you want to find a way to allow these principles of gentleness and presence, of nourishment into your daily life. In Taoism, they're called yang shen, nourishing life. Very important method. If you think about it, what's the opposite of nourishing life? So don't do those things. They lead to short-term success and early death. Letting your qi collect, your awareness settle. So people ask me about lots of various methods of practice. And the difficulty is that so many methods of practice are, in my opinion, misunderstood or misused, so that they create this short-term gain, but overall cultivate tension and strain in the body, cultivate hardness in the tissues, hardening of the mind, qi to come up instead of collect. And so you get washes of sensation and these changes, but your system never cultivates anything. And so the very first method, whatever it is that you're doing, has to help you learn the most important thing, which is to let go, to become quiet and still inside, to allow things to rest, to develop the proper kind of intention, the proper kind of relationship to yourself for one tissue to relate to the next. And all of those changes are very simple. And for some reason, people want to go to step 20 before they cultivate the first ones. But if they go to step 20, and plenty of people like to write books about step 20, but all they end up doing is hurting themselves because they never developed the first steps of letting go. And for some reason, that seems to be the hardest step. And so we want to do what we can to take the time to cultivate the most important first steps before trying to do other things. easy, soft. Learning to listen. Again, just a reminder to become present and still. To let your awareness soak into that layer that we're reaching to, just beneath the skin, just on top of the musculature, allowing the movement to release that layer open, easing it open. And I know you mentioned that for some reason my mic picks up this sound like sandpaper or something, so I apologize if it's really loud. I can always move the mic further away. It just sounds like me touching cloth lightly, but for some reason it likes to pick it up. So let me know if you need me to turn my sound off or something. Softening beneath the knees, gentle circles. Remember to soften your hips. Allow your back to remain relatively straight so that your neck can be soft and upright. It's funny. One of the lessons that took me a while to learn when I started in the clinic, and again, if you ever want lots of experience really fast, offer treatments to the public for free. And you learn really specific lessons really quickly that seem to hold true even across separate cultures and countries that I live in. And one of them is that I could tell people to do all kinds of extreme things. I could tell them to take up ultra marathoning, and they may do it. I could tell them to have a really strange, extreme diet. Only eat this one kind of meat, or exists completely on bark or something. I've heard of people doing that kind of thing. I had a woman coming to me who only ate watermelon, which eventually killed her. True story. And that kind of thing is really common. People are really willing to do all kinds of strange, expensive, difficult things. And what's the one thing that's very difficult to get them to do? To become moderate. For some reason, moderation is really difficult for people. Just doing simple, small things that are good for them. A little every day. It can be cheap or free. It can be easy. Doesn't require a lot. but people somehow don't believe that that's something that's helpful. And I don't know why, since everything we know is to the contrary of that. Just learning how to be moderate, gentle, nourishing, eat basically good foods, healthy foods, move basically enough, but not too much, sleep just enough, not too much. Learn to regulate and heal your emotions. You don't have to become a sage, but just become a basically balanced, normal person. And that does wonders for the health. When people come in asking questions, and if I recommend that, it is so rare that they'll actually take that advice. But if I told them to wear, red underwear for 6 months, they might do that. True story. And so it's a funny fact of human nature that it took me years to not feel frustrated about. So I encourage you to simply be gentle and kind. Don't go to extremes. Just take care of yourself and the people around you. And somehow that has a magical impact. And then after several years, comfortable, moderate lifestyle, being basically healthy and just a normal, whatever that means, people will look at you and say, how do you keep your life together like this? Because people's lives are zooming from one extreme to the other, falling apart, they piece it back together, it falls apart again, because of this habit of extremes. If you can stop reaching for extremes and instead just cultivate balance, wondrous things happen. And the people won't believe you when you tell them how you got there. Softening open. Sitting on my very comfortable donation from Chris. For a while, when I was giving herbs to a lot of my patients, I found that there were certain formulas that worked very well in pill form, capsules and things, and they were less expensive. And so I would offer them to people. thinking it would be easier for them to take than something that tastes horrible and they have to boil it and they have to buy it and carry it around. And one thing that I learned is that people, it seems, they feel like unless it tastes terrible and is really difficult, then it can't be good for you. And sometimes the things that just feel nice and nourishing, sometimes those really are good medicine. But we have this need for pain as though we have to punish ourselves for a life of enjoyment or something. And that's how we get healthy. Healthy foods taste bad. Veggies are terrible. Just find a way to live a comfortable, happy life. A quiet revolution of living peacefully. A reminder to make sure that you are using comfortable, good posture so that your body is able to breathe and release. If you're pushing your body, then it will freeze up to defend itself. Comfortable, warm. You can do this kind of practice in a bath, being gentle and easy. So just as an example, for some reason today, this line on the outside of my legs feels really nice. It just has this sense that my body wants to be open in that area. So it's nice to do a little extra work here. Even though it's not technically part of the set, my system is saying, oh, try this. This will make you feel good. And so I'm listening to it. And I encourage everyone to treat the practice that way. Learning to listen. And to listen, we have to get out of the way. Getting out of the way means making space. Emptying your cup. Did everyone know the emptying the cup story? Old Zen story? Lots of questions. Yeah, it's a good story, Anna. It's always a good reminder, especially as we learn. Remember that it is perfectly fine to sit. Ideally, like I say, with something beneath you to lift you off the ground a little bit to help you soften your hips. If you find that your legs are tightening here, then go more slowly, emphasizing traveling over the top. You're lengthening your spine, not shortening it down toward your legs. You're going around a circle. Be effortless and free. Make sure that you're not holding your breath or holding your mind. Comfortable. Feels nice. Really engage your feet. Make sure that the movement is traveling all the way up to where you're resting on the chair or on the ground. Both directions. If you find this tiring, then of course stop or make the movement slower or more gentle. For me today, this invigoration feels nice, but I don't want it to become something that adds tension. This is still softening all of this open. It's partially why I'm using my hands. You can see how soft my legs are. I'm not tightening and pushing and pulling on my legs. Everything is released. That's the kind of motion. Motion itself is trying to come from here. But as usual, move at the speed that helps you feel soft, open. Again, make sure that your breath is easy. You're folding from the hip joint. Soft, flowing movements. Make sure that this part of your thigh stays soft. If possible, your lower back is very soft. Part of what we're doing is engaging through this movement of the feet, the bottom of the feet. That's why we've been practicing this movement separately as well. Helping to relieve and to lengthen the kidney channel. But that only works if we are not shortening the legs. So all of this continues long, but if you grip, that actually shortens and pulls everything inward. Shortening, tightening is what we want the opposite of. We want to lengthen and soften. All of this lengthens and becomes soft. Folding from the hip. Make sure your breath is comfortable, everything is easy, and only go as far as is comfortable. Everyone's body is different, and every day it's a little bit different. soft. Gosh. What a nice day here. Fairly warm outside, not raining. A little humid in between rains. Ground is wet, but there's no ice, no snow. A very early beginning of spring, it feels like. Sometimes if I just wait, my body just keeps moving. It's working movements out. And that's okay, but I'm not adding any movement. Letting your whole body soften. If you choose to lie down, allow the weight of your body to transfer into the ground. Very likely you're slightly holding yourself away from the ground. So just release as usual. Remember that if you need to, you can always place something beneath your knees, a little bolster or a backpack, something that you stick there, a pillow. And then as well, if your neck is uncomfortable, you can always place something beneath your neck and head. When your mind wanders away, just Notice and release the distraction and let it drift back to what you're doing. No force necessary. If you ever learn to practice Qigong napping methods, this is a good chance to do that kind of practice in the future. Or if it's later in the evening for you, you can just lie down and let yourself go to sleep. That's perfectly okay. But if you are going to get up and you're laying down, you can simply roll onto your side so that your spine is in a safer position to get up. Again, of course, this depends on what your body is doing at the moment. And then you can use your arms to lever yourself up, keeping your spine safe. Noticing that sense of settling, at least into the navel or the spine opposite the navel. And eventually, if you can, allow your awareness to nestle itself into the space between the two. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. I know Del likes to ask a whole host of them, but I want to make sure if there's anybody else who has questions that we make space for them. Oh, one question Chris had asked was about swallowing, that sometimes it can be difficult to follow that feeling, that movement of the saliva traveling down. And it's just a way of helping guide the awareness through. And so if you're unable to follow the sensation down, usually it just means there's not a lot of awareness yet in your tissues inside the body. And so that over time will be helped through this softening process because we're allowing our mind to sink into the body. And we're selectively developing awareness over the whole surface of the body. So it does get easier as your mind slows down and settles into the body, because so much of what we do in our daily lives is do mind over matter. We separate our body from our mind. We imagine that they're different from each other. We push ourselves. We block out our own sensations, and we we don't allow ourselves to heal and become whole again. And so all of these practices that we're doing are designed to allow that sense of wholeness to return, for us to inhabit our physical nature, our emotional nature, for us to allow our mind to slow down enough so that we can use it rather than it using us, so to speak, to become aware of our environment and the people around us. So often we're caught up in these delusions that we can't even notice what's happening in our bodies or around us. And so all of this is designed to help us slow down and re-inhabit our own experience. And that's where the healing happens. That's where all transformation happens. Any other talk of transformation in any other circumstance is just a joke, or at best unhealthy, in my opinion. Oh, Anna, thank you. Steph, thank you so much. It's nice to have you both here. Quiet people in the background. And Steph, I hope that you're feeling better. So let me wander through the Dell pile. So yeah, not likely to practice the 6 healing sounds online unless it's with people that I know, and probably if they're on camera with me, because then I can follow and help them release. But to do it correctly, which is to say not the way that it's usually taught in the books, requires a deep level of release and self-awareness in these tissues like I'm talking about. And so it's a big ask for people to just sort of try it and figure it out. And so practices like the self-massage set or quiet sitting are so great because it's really hard to get them wrong. You know, I mean, people still can, but it's much easier to just soften your body, to let your mind become a little bit more quiet because you're releasing. You're not trying to do anything with your awareness. You're not trying to feel specialized areas in a special way. And so I feel like this is a safer and healthier method. And so we'll have to see how people feel after the 100 days and how people improve. But it seems unlikely that in this situation we'd be doing that kind of practice here. Yeah, joy is a type, it's one of the extremes that can be damaging. But remember that the translation of the word into joy, because English has so few words for happiness and joy and that kind of thing, that there are completely different words in both the Buddhist, like the Pali, Sanskrit writing styles, and even the Chinese or the Japanese translations. And so these descriptions of sensations and feelings are different than what we're talking about with joy. Joy in the Buddhist context, because remember, I think we talked about this yesterday as well, is that's what kind of what we're describing here is the Buddhist context, both Indian and Chinese, Japanese, that if you are free of desire, like it is possible for anyone to become free of desire, for instance, of greed, hatred, and delusion. These are the poisons. It is absolutely possible as a cultivation to become free of those qualities which exist in only a certain aspect of our nature that we can release. And in that space of desirelessness, which is to say complete contentment and presence and calm and a sense of deep connection, the feeling that arises from that is indescribable. And it's very different than the kind of happiness we talk about. Like if I go out and get a car, I get the whatever. That's a different kind of stimulation of our nervous system that's actually considered unhealthy in Chinese medicine. And that's why we talk about it that way. And that's why it's one of the virtues of a Buddha is this quality of like wondrous, like peaceful, joyous contentment, bliss. It's usually translated as, but I don't like that term. That quality it's completely different. They're not even close to the same thing. We just don't have good English terms for it, which is why I'm always contending for people to learn different languages. But it is, I understand the confusion around it because happiness feels good, feels better than depression, or like you say, boredom, for instance. But it's funny because actually in the direction of boredom is usually where most freedom lies. Because boredom is just the mind saying, give me something to do. As the monkey jumps around. Boredom is an expression of tension and the need to be moved in a certain way. And so we actually, depending on the method, you want to relax around that and lean in the direction of boredom, because that's actually where freedom is. But that's a whole thing. Yeah, oxytocin, serotonin, norepinephrine, the cocktail that we get, people crave that stuff. And that's not the same thing as what comes from proper meditation practice. Again, I'm not telling anyone to not go out and be happy. I'm just saying that when we're talking about descriptions of things, these are different things. Again, also teaching sleep is a whole separate thing. Yeah, and try to sleep in a way that doesn't compress your body if possible, which is hard to do because you're asleep. But if you can, have a good bed. I slept for years in tents and cabins and in cars and trucks. And so I know what it's like to sleep in odd situations, but you do want to try to let yourself spread out as much as you can and be supported, well supported. Like try to avoid sleeping on your stomach or your face or something, because that always will cause compression of the internal organs of the heart. It's hard to make that into a healthy sleeping position, but definitely make sure you get enough sleep. That's one thing for sure. Oh, thanks, Steph. If you're still here, I really appreciate you. Sorry, I read so slowly, it takes me time to get through stuff. I read a lot, but it's mostly through audiobook because I'm pretty dyslexic. So I had to stare at the text until it turns into meaningful. I had to translate English into John speak. Yeah, Anna, we can do Zoom in the future. I want to make sure I get through the practices that seem most essential, and if people are following well. YouTube is just such a nice space and way to reach out to people without having to know them specifically. But definitely over time, we'll make more specialized classes for individual levels of people and what they want to attain. And that's in the future. But for now, it's just throwing stuff out on YouTube and hoping people can benefit. Good night, Chris. Thanks for hanging out. Boredom is a sign of anger or type of anger. That's really interesting. I mean, I guess if you define anger as a kind of grip on something, a movement toward something, I'm thinking of how Buddhists may describe it. I grew up Buddhist, and that's where I first learned how to be content. And the anger, they're describing emotions very often that move toward things and emotions that move away from things, because we have this broad tendency to try to get stuff or to not have stuff happen or to sort of fade out and become delusional or numb. There's two directions and one sort of non-direction. And anger is one of those that moves toward things. And so it may be that, again, dependent upon the translation or who's looking at it this way, I'm just guessing at what they mean, that boredom, because it's one of those things that moves you toward things, like in the old way of looking at like the yogic Indian context of, if you know this old system, sorry, I'm probably going way off the rails here, but Vata, Pitta, Kapha, it's different body types in this system. And those are that kind of thing where they don't move, some tend to move away, some tend to move toward. It's just a way of organizing people into different types. And boredom is one of those things that tries to agitate you and get you to do stuff. Anger is like that. So it may be that they're classifying it together, but that's just my guess. Or it could be, again, a bad translation, that each culture has different emotional spectrums that they identify, which is a really fascinating study if you ever get into it, that what what, for instance, I growing up in the United States tend to label as the major emotions are actually different than the emotions that were labeled in China. Modern China versus ancient China is also different. It's really fascinating. All the different cultures tend to do that, but we all translate them into the same words because we are unable to try to learn different words or different languages, culturally speaking. And so that's, again, me leaning into like people should go out and learn new cultures and new words because it allows for different kinds of nuance, I think. Mm-hmm. And again, this is just my guess at whatever this person meant, but that's my thought about it. Any other questions? Thanks, everybody. I appreciate you joining me. Enjoy your practice.